Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service, and happy Boxing Day for our Canadian friends that might be catching the signal tonight. December 26, 2013. As always, we encourage you to visit our website at arh.noaa.gov for the complete statewide view of what's going on in the weather world. You can always head to weather.gov as well. Click on Alaska, which will immediately take you to the closest office that serves where you clicked on the map. If that's in the interior, that'll be Fairbanks, South Central, and Southwest. Of course, that is Anchorage, and for Southeast, you get Juneau. The weather info line will serve all those regions as well. 800-472-0391. Find us on Twitter under NWS Fairbanks, NWS Anchorage, and NWS Juneau. On Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska. During the afternoon, you get a brief statewide update on YouTube at NWS Anchorage. And of course, following this broadcast through our broadcast partners, Alaska Public, you'll get the entire broadcast on their website or by searching AKWX TV. And wow, that's a lot of ways to get the information. Good for you. Here is Thursday morning's low temperatures across the state. I'm just going to step out of the way. The folks up in Fairbanks put this together for us today. Thursday morning low temperatures there in Chicken, 58 below. That is the coldest temperature we've seen so far this season across the interior. Certainly very cold across the border into Yukon as well. Tok 52 below, Donnelly and Eagle both at 50 below, 49 below in Delta Junction, Fort Yukon, North Pole and Bettles. Also really cold stuff there in Nenana, Fort Wainwright and Circle Hot Springs, anywhere from 42 to about 45 below. Serious cold across the interior, and another night of it for you. Now, one thing that does happen that can kind of stem the difference between really ridiculous cold and not so bad, just a little change in elevation. The cold, dense air likes to trap itself in the valleys. So if you've been in Fairbanks or the Tanana valleys there or around the Fairbanks Airport, you notice that really deep cold there in places like the Fairbanks Airport and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Just a little difference in that elevation changes the temperature dramatically. You get up to Fort Wainwright, it's 44 below, and you start getting up into the hills around Cleary Summit, and you'll notice those temperatures warming to about 9 below. Well, this is pretty impressive warming considering how deep and nasty that cold is below the inversion. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at the map here for the winter weather advisory across the interior, we're talking about the higher spots on the map there. So places like Cleary Summit, the wind moving across that will produce a wind chill of 45 below in some cases. So be extra careful if you're moving across some of those higher areas where the wind is moving. Of course, down below in the inversion, the air is going to be very still, and the temperature might even be colder than that. So very interesting to see how we're trying to work around some of the inversion changes there with elevation. But if you're up on top of the mountains where it's actually warmer, the wind could be blowing, making it feel almost as cold as what you'd find down in the valley. Well, if you cut it that way, it's still just cold in the interior. So be careful, folks, and well, stay warm out there. Here's a look at low pressure across the North Pacific. A large gyre moving its way slowly north and eastward toward the West Pacific. You can see the cold air moving off the continent here across areas very close to the YK Delta and the Norton Sound. Also another surge of moisture working its way out of the Sea of Japan. That will join the force of this low pressure system here in just a matter of days. This will produce some stronger winds just south of the Aleutians. It doesn't look like it's going to get too bad there this time around. For southeast, you can see the last remnants of clouds moving over the central and southern parts of southeast before that next storm works its way into the Gulf later on. Most of what you're seeing across Alaska is just the deep cold being sensed by the temperature sensor on the satellite that's trying to help us draw in the clouds in the infrared mode here. What you're seeing moving, that is cloud cover, and not a whole lot of it there across south central and southwestern Alaska. Most of what we're seeing across the interior is snow cover and just plain cold weather across the interior tonight. So today's weather map, looks like we've had some spots of maybe some light snow or flurries out around areas around Tok and perhaps Chicken and southward into the Copper River Basin. Nothing substantial there. The rain's really been focused on southeast once again. Places like Annette picked up over an inch of precipitation today. Pockets of rain and fog around the Pribilofs there, and then just a lot of low cloud cover right across the Bering Sea. Rain in Shemya, not a whole lot coming from that weather report right now, but we do notice that it is raining out there. And the frontal boundary just south of Adak and Atka moving northward. The low 962 millibars, flurries and fog there east of Dead Horse, Prudhoe Bay, Kaktovik, Kuparik, and on into the northern sections of the Yukon coast with high pressure across the Arctic at 1,032 millibars. Low pressure sitting very close to Prince William Sound later on tonight. That is going to work with a pretty tight pressure gradient, brought you in part by that intense cold across the interior and weak waves of low pressure trying to sneak into the south side of that. Across southeast, pockets of rain and maybe some snow across higher terrain. Haines and Skyway could see some of that. The frontal boundary working its way across the Aleutian chain, maybe nudging into the Alaska Peninsula around the Shumagon Islands and perhaps points eastward. We'll start to draw in some warmer air and notice a little bit of a ridge here across the central and eastern Gulf. That is also bringing more clouds back into the Gulf and parts of the eastern sections of the Gulf there, including southeast, which you'll get another slug of precipitation out of this. Some pockets of snow showers perhaps along an upper level boundary there in the Bering Sea. Other than that, just clear and cold across the interior and areas of blowing and drifting snow, especially across those summits where, again, the wind chill advisory is in effect. For Friday, high pressure sitting across the Yukon will lock in that deep cold. So if you're in a valley, Northway, Eagle, Tok, Chicken, of course, you're talking about more morning cold and cold that just won't budge for the day. Out across the south and west, precipitation's moving into that now, so that low level air is starting to fill in and will probably warm up as a result. You're looking at an opportunity and a chance of snow across southwest Alaska, periods of light rain across the Alaska Peninsula, probably some stronger winds here around Adak on that north and easterly flow that strengthens behind the 979 millibar low now. Here comes the triple point working its way into the west and central parts of the Gulf. Low pressure still dawdling over southeast. That means colder air across the north and pockets of snow there for the higher terrain, maybe as close as Yakutat. A rain and snow mix for some of the inner channels there and likely a little bit more rain toward coastal areas, but by and large, the southern two-thirds of southeast will be dealing with liquid rather than snow, it looks like at this point. As we get into Saturday, here comes that next surge, making it all the way across the eastern Gulf, wrapping around a dying frontal boundary that will still be able to kick off some snow, and part of that will affect south central Alaska, the Susitna Valley, Mat-Su, and parts of the Kenai with a chance of snow, especially the western side. Eventually works into the Prince William Sound region through the weekend, but most of southeast will be focused on wet weather, with some areas across probably Juneau and northward to Gustavus, looking at a chance of snow once again. And to the west, we're going to keep an eye on this one. This is a next storm trying to break down the pattern. We've got intense cold across the interior, a lot of clear sky, a lot of very dry air, obviously, with that. And that's taken over a lot of the Bering Sea. But nudging into that, a sign that something's happening in the upper levels. We've got a stronger storm building in across the Kamchatka Peninsula and a pretty intense low. Will it be able to break down this pattern? Probably not, but it is working in that general direction. So signs of change, perhaps at least a little bit in the temporary change weather category for late December, early January. Yeah, perhaps the beginning of the weekend, certainly showing some wet weather focused on south and southeast as we go. Today's afternoon temperatures, I think it was a 96-degree temperature spread on this map here. See if you can find the difference with me here. 45 there in Ketchikan. Earlier in the afternoon, it made up to 46 in Heidelberg, so certainly the warmth was in southeast today. 30s and 40s there for a large part of southeast. 39 in Juneau, 22 up around Haines and Skagway, 42 in Sitka. Middleton Island was 36, 10 degrees colder was Cordova, 10 degrees colder than that was Valdez, and 31 there around Whittier today. 20s for Homer and Seward, 4 below in Kenai, not a whole lot better there up the road in Soldotna. 9 degrees in Anchorage and Palmer and Wasilla, 8 below as you went up a little bit higher toward the Matanuska Glacier. And then Red Devil Mountain, 24 below. Looked like Glen Allen was 19 below. Talkeetna, 22 below. A little bit further up the road, things improved a little bit. And then you got into Healy, and the temperature plummeted to 36 below. Looks like Tanana was around 45 below, Fairbanks 36 below, and Eagle was showing 50 below. But wait, there's more. Let's go up to Fort Yukon, where it was 51 below, and that's where we get our 96-degree temperature difference there. You remember, you got to add and take away the minus and do some crazy elementary math there to do that. But yeah, 96 degrees just in Alaska alone. And then if you look at Miami, it was well over 100 degrees difference across the continent today. Impressive stuff. 15 to 35 below across the Arctic coast, 19 below in Barrow today. Wainwright was showing 22 below. In the Kotzebue Sound, temperatures were anywhere from 20 to 25 below, 30 below there, in fact, around Deering. 17 below with Shishmaref back on the map today. Welcome back. 9 above in Nome. Norton Sound temperatures were a lot closer to 0. Into the western interior and the low to mid Yukon Valley and the Koyukuk Valley, we saw temperatures between 30 and 40 below. Galena was about there. 31 below in McGrath, 4 below in Bethel. The Pribilofs were looking at temps above freezing. Bristol Bay in the single digits and teens with King Salmon at 15, 30 in Kodiak, 30s and 40s for the Alaskan Peninsula. And Shemya, unfortunately not reporting the temperature, but we did see readings in Adak and Aka very close to 40 degrees, about the same there in Unalaska Dutch Harbor. Overnight lows will stay above freezing for a large part of the Alaskan Peninsula and the Aleutians, very close to freezing in the Pribilofs. Once you get north of the Kuskokwim Valley and the Yukon Valley, temperatures go well south of 0. In fact, 30 to 40 below again for the western interior and the west coast around Norton Sound, 10 below in Nome, 5 above in St. Lawrence Island, and around the Arctic coast, 20 to 30 below for the central and eastern interior, the plateaus. And the flats, we're looking at temperatures that are at least 50 below in some cases there. North Wayne Eagle, probably very close to that. Prince William Sound, might see a few places there that get into the pretty nasty cold tonight. You're looking at areas in the southeast that could get pretty chilly as well, 30s and 40s for many areas there. And high temperatures tomorrow that should go above freezing, again for Sitka, Heidelberg, Ketchikan, Annette, Hyder itself, and maybe even Petersburg at 36 degrees. For Prince William Sound, look at temperatures in the mid to upper teens, 7 degrees in Kenai. Look for 27 below in Fairbanks, 38 below in Fort Yukon, and many areas out in the west really not showing any huge moderation in temperatures. Nome only 3, 1 below in Bethel, teens and 20s for Bristol Bay, and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula with 38 in Kodiak. Here's a look at your flying weather now, and IFR conditions should be expected ahead of the low that's moving into the central and eastern parts of the Alaska Peninsula and out toward the western Gulf around Kodiak Island. IFR conditions there, and south of the Pribilofs and also into the central Bering Sea. North of that, it's VFR. Probably some areas of fog from time to time, but by and large, VFR conditions across most of the interior. You'll run into morning fog across some areas in south central. That should go away fairly quickly, we think. And for a large part of southeast, that should still remain MVFR. So here are your pass conditions in detail. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass we expect to be all clear at this point. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, and for your entire run around the Alaska Range tomorrow, Rainy and Windy Pass should be VFR. Isabel Pass expected to be visual. Same goes for Mentasta, at least by early in the day. We expect by late afternoon that should probably be back at MVFR conditions. And for Tinita Pass, that one should be okay. VFR conditions there. Same goes for Portage Pass with MVFR conditions across Prince William Sound itself. And Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to remain MVFR. Freezing levels, obviously the interior and the bulk of the 49th under the freezing mark there. For the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians, we'll say that's above freezing for right now. And most of southeast, at least north of Sitka, will be sub-freezing. However, across the Gulf, you can see that warm air is really spreading out, so no great surge right now making its way into the southeastern parts of the state. Icing potential wrapping around that low pressure system all the way into the central and eastern parts of the chain. You may find some increased icing threat, occasional moderate, let's say, for the central and eastern parts of the chain above 4,000 feet and below 6. So kind of a marginal layer there, but one that might have a little bit of extra rime for you if you're not careful. Light, moderate icing potential there around Kodiak Island and the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula tomorrow. Here's the jet stream, and remember we were looking at the surface chart and we had that really sharp contrast with very hard southerly flow working its way up the eastern parts of Russia. Well, that's due to that 150 knot jet blowing in. That's trying to build this ridge in across the west. Well, we've got a pretty pronounced trough from the west coast of Alaska all the way into the central Pacific. So until this gets out of the way, that surface feature probably won't have a lot of push to make it across the very cold Bering Sea or even to the very colder western parts of Alaska. In the meantime, though, it's sure fun to watch. It looks like we'll see a lot of cloud cover and probably storms building out in this area here until this trough moves or falls apart, or perhaps the jet makes a little shortcut here. That probably won't have a lot of change. In the meantime, high pressure across the Arctic is just pushing that cold into the Yukon, British Columbia, and the heart of Alaska. And of course, that's working its way into the lower 48. So give it a week or so, and your friends anywhere in the Midwest, the East Coast, or maybe even parts of the Intermountain West will be sorely complaining about the cold that we're sending them in that direction. For the Gulf of Alaska, a south and westerly flow moving into southeast. You're looking at 20 and 30 knot winds moving there. 40 knot winds mainly coming in on a southerly note into Kodiak, with a light northeasterly flow coming into the Alaska Range, 15 to 25 knots there, mainly across the interior at 9,000 feet. Ridge of high pressure really trying to work its way southward, with low pressure trying to work its way north and east. This is that next storm system we saw moving into the Gulf, and northerlies follow that across west central and western parts of the chain. At 3,000 feet, again, a little bit of a ridge across the west coast of the lower 48. That's bringing that south and westerly flow into southeastern Alaska. Southerlies continue into south central and southwest Alaska. Light east to west flow across the Yukon Valley and the Arctic coast between 15 and 25 knots. Our wave of low pressure there across the North Pacific, dragging in stronger winds at 3,000 feet between 50 and 60 knots across the central and western chain, and a pretty hard offshore flow there from the YK Delta, showing anywhere from 25 to 30 knots. So turbulence potential. Right now there probably will be some kind of a harder gradient across the YK Delta and the mid-Yukon Valley, mainly below 5,000 feet. Similar levels there for the Alaska Peninsula and the central and eastern parts of the chain, and a wide area across the west and central Gulf of Alaska. Right now it doesn't look like too many turbulence issues there across southeast, so your visibility issues are the ones you have to contend with tomorrow, maybe MVFR as we saw earlier. All these maps and more always online at our website. Go to weather.gov and then click on the Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Southeast Alaska areas in Juneau, and you should be able to see something that says TV Desk on the left-hand side of your screen. That will take you to all of these maps and more, and of course you can find this broadcast later on in the evening at alaskapublic.org. In just a few minutes we'll be back with your marine weather. First, let's listen from the Stargazers in their latest report.
Bye-bye Venus goodbye, and celebrate the new year with the New Year's Eve star. Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Marlene Hidalgo, science teacher from Miami, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
Viewers have asked us to find something special in the heavens they can see each holiday night.
And we're pleased to present a very special New Year's Eve star, which you can see every New Year's Eve for the rest of your life.
Plus, giant Jupiter will be very close, and we're about to say goodbye to Venus in the evening. Let's show you.
Okay, we've got our skies set up for 8 p.m. your local time, New Year's Eve, facing south. And first, like all good astronomers, let's draw an imaginary line which divides the eastern half of the sky from the western half.
An imaginary line called the meridian, which runs from the horizon due south straight up to the zenith point and then back down to the horizon due north.
Now, as our Earth slowly and endlessly rotates from west to east, we're nightly treated to the grandest optical illusion in nature, that of watching the stars seem to rise in the east, slowly travel across the sky all night long, and eventually set in the west.
And if you watch every night, you'll eventually notice that the highest point any star reaches above the horizon in its nightly journey is when it is smack dab on the meridian.
Now, this is very important to telescope users because the higher a sky object is above the horizon, the better its telescopic image will be.
Which brings us to an amazing coincidence, something which I had never read about in any astronomy book. And that coincidence is, no matter where you happen to be on New Year's Eve, as hour after hour goes by, the brightest star in the heavens, Sirius, will slowly climb up in the southeastern sky, and at midnight will reach its highest point and be on the meridian.
Think of it. The brightest star visible from our planet reaches its highest point above the horizon at midnight every New Year's Eve.
Almost like a cosmic reminder that this most brilliant of stellar lights is welcoming in and shining on the new year, giving us all hope for a bright new beginning.
Plus, if you happen to miss it on New Year's Eve, don't fret, because Sirius will be in almost the same spot at midnight each night for the first week of the new year.
And to top it off, this New Year's Eve at midnight will have yet another added attraction because about 40 degrees above Sirius, you'll see giant Jupiter with its 4 dancing moons. And right now, Jupiter is close to opposition, which means Jupiter is about as close, big, and bright as it gets, and is now at its best through a telescope for all of 2014.
What a way to welcome 2014, with not only a New Year's Eve star, but one of the two superplanets at its best. Which brings us back to the other superplanet, Venus. And when I say superplanet, I mean they are super bright. To catch Venus, you have to look much earlier, not long after sunset, and you'll have to have a clear low horizon in the southwest.
Because Venus is about to leave our evening skies and won't return until next December. I know I've gotten used to seeing Venus every night since May, but like the year, it all has to end sometime, and this is about the end for Venus. A couple of special days to take a last look at Venus are the evenings of January 2nd and 3rd, when a skinny crescent moon will join Venus for a couple of farewell moon Venus scoochies.
So if you want to start this New Year's and every New Year's Eve right, step outside at midnight and make your new year bright with the cosmic light of the brightest star, Sirius.
And this year you'll have the giant planet Jupiter adding to the New Year's celebration by crossing the meridian at midnight.
And if that's too late for you, get out just after sunset and look southwest for the last few glimpses of the brightest planet of them all, Venus, with the moon joining her on the nights of January 2nd and 3rd.
Happy New Year and
Keep looking up.
This time of year, a lot of you on the West Coast and working the Bering Sea are watching the ice edge with great care, and you can always do that by heading to our site at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. You can see a lot of shore-fast ice here in Bristol Bay, all the way up the coast toward Macquarie and Nunivak Island, Hooper Bay, and into Norton Sound, and of course around St. Lawrence Island at this point. It has not yet reached the St. Matthew Island waters or the Pribilofs just yet. Give it a few months or at least a few weeks. And across Cook Inlet, shore-fast ice here across the western side and into the northern parts of Cook Inlet. Again, more to be explored, and you can always see the seasonal outlook anytime by heading to our website we just mentioned. Again, this brought to you from Alaska's Sea Ice Program. Here's a look at southeastern Alaska and the marine forecast now as we get into the end of the holiday week. A westerly onshore flow between 20 and 25 knots, 9 to 11 foot seas in the north, 12 foot seas in the south, coming into the Dixon entrance across the southern inner channels and points northward towards Stevens Passage, a 15-knot wind with 3 foot seas on the inside, 4 foot seas in the Lynn Canal, more of a northerly flow draining out some of that cold air with a 20-knot flow. Really little change here across the inner channels tomorrow. However, we will see the southeasterly winds picking up ahead of the next storm wave crossing the Gulf. 25 to 30 knots there with 5 to 6 foot seas and a broad southeasterly flow running up the coast from Craig, Sitka to Gustavus and Yakutat. Looking at more of a 30-knot flow from the east around Yakutat with a 13-foot sea, and southeasterlies bringing 9 to 12-foot seas there along coastal sections of southeast. For south central now, you can notice the cold, dry air draining out to sea. There may be some fog as winds are fairly light during the morning. That should burn off. A northeasterly flow strengthens around the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, Shelikof Strait, all areas that could be dealing with heavy freezing spray. So watch that potential. North and easterly flow should remain light inside Prince William Sound, and easterly flow coming into the Kenai Peninsula around Homer and Seward, and southerly flow blowing into Prince William Sound. As we get into Saturday, the winds across some of the northern parts of the Gulf should strengthen, 20 to 30 knots there. That means some gusts could be possible out of the Copper River Basin as well. 4-foot seas inside Prince William Sound, 10-foot seas on the outside. A southerly flow coming into Kodiak Bay. Notice more of a north and easterly flow that could work its way into Marmot Bay during the weekend. 15-knot winds with an 8-foot sea, and northeasterlies coming through Shelikof Strait and draining all the way down the Cook Inlet around 10 to 20 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas there closer to Cook Inlet and Shelikof Strait, with freezing spray still a threat. Cars across the Alaska Peninsula, a south and easterly wind should be expected. 25 knots there in the Pacific side with 9 to 15 foot seas, and 6 to 8 foot seas on the Bristol Bay side, with higher gusts still possible north of the Alaska Peninsula. As we get into Saturday, the winds lessen somewhat, become a little more variable with time. A 4-foot sea north of Cold Bay, southeasterly flow inside Bristol Bay, and southeasterlies around 20 knots with 14 to 15-foot seas on the Pacific side for Saturday. Across the Aleutians, northerly winds already felt from Kiska to Attu at 10-foot sea there out around Shemya. You're looking at an east and northeasterly flow on the north side of the chain. Winds are a little bit lighter there south of Nikolsky, but more of a southerly flow around Unalaska, more of a northeasterly flow south of Atka with 18-foot seas expected there. 10 to 13-foot seas on the north side. Winds are still variable, especially in the morning on Saturday, but they'll eventually reach up to 20 knots or so as kind of in between phases of one storm moving into the Gulf and the next one setting up in the west. Remember, once again, that storm we were talking about in the west with a very broad southerly flow, well, it's already catching the western parts of the chain, drawing in 30 to 40 knot winds and 9 to 14-foot seas there. More of a variable flow across the central and eastern parts of the chain on Saturday. Southeasterlies could remain light south of Unalaska with a 12-foot sea. Northerlies south of Adak and Atka 20 knots and 10 to 20 knot flow on the north side of the chain. For the west coast, northeasterlies will sweep across the Bering Sea in broad fashion. 30 to 35 knot winds are expected with 9 to 12-foot seas in most areas. 8-foot seas coming out of Kuskokwim Bay with a 30-knot wind. And again, the ice hasn't quite made it as far south as St. Matthew, but it sure is filling along the shoreline there. For Saturday, northeasterlies diminish somewhat. 25 to 30 knot winds in most cases. 4 to 6-foot seas closer to the coast. 9-foot seas out around St. Matthew and the Pribilofs with freezing spray remaining a threat. Easterly winds work all the way across Kaktovik to Point Barrow. Northeasterly south of Cape Lisburne into Kotzebue Sound, around 15 knots or so for Friday. And for Saturday, very little change there, maybe a slight shift in the wind around Wainwright and Cape Lisburne, but all in all, 15 to 20 knot wind should be expected around the North Slope. Let's recap what's going on around Alaska tonight. A frontal boundary lies across the North Gulf Coast and southeast, focusing in pockets of rain and snow there. Broad frontal boundaries working its way across the Alaska Peninsula and into the western Gulf. There may be some areas of stronger winds, especially around mountain passes in the interior. And for those areas in the central and eastern parts of the interior, a winter weather advisory for dangerous wind chill down to 45 below is possible there, but mainly on the summits there. Down below, it's just going to be plain old cold with temperatures anywhere from 40 to 50 below in some cases. Heading into Friday, the frontal boundary works across the Alaska Peninsula, pockets of rain and snow in south and east, and moving into southwest Alaska, and snow is possible over the weekend in south central. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.